The United States Navy just pulled off what might be one of the most daring cross-border strikes in history, and the mission almost ended in complete disaster. What happens when pilots have less than 40 seconds to outsmart missiles, traveling at 3 times the speed of sound? And how did these Navy pilots navigate a supersonic fighter jet through dense jungle terrain for 2 hours without hitting the trees while completely flattening a massive drug manufacturing facility? Join us as we break down an operation that almost became a catastrophe. On May 3, 2025, pilots from the United States Navy carried out a high-risk strike across the border. 4 F-15 Strike Eagle fighter jets flew more than 800 kilometers, which is about 500 miles, mostly at an altitude of 150 to 200 feet, roughly the height of a 15-story building. They flew without lights and kept radio silence the entire way. Their target was a large drug production site hidden deep in the jungle of Venezuela. The facility had been making a large amount of cocaine and fentanyl for distribution across South America. The mission started in complete darkness at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach as 4 F-15 Strike Eagle fighter jets took off without using any outside lights. No radio signals were sent and no electronic systems were active. Everything was done to avoid being picked up by enemy tracking systems. The jets headed south over the Caribbean Sea, flying only 290 feet above the water. Their engines made little noise as they moved at 800 feet per second. Flying that low and fast was very risky, like driving a race car at 200 miles per hour just inches from the ground. At that height, even a tiny mistake could be fatal. A small turn in the wrong direction could cause a crash in less than 0.2 of a second. The pilots had to stay completely focused because any slip could mean disaster. 5 minutes after taking off, the jets turned near the Outer Banks and flew along the east coast of Florida. This part of the flight was the most dangerous. The pilots shut off everything except what was needed to fly and avoid radar. Their helmets showed maps, radar zones, and danger areas on a clear screen in green. Because they were flying so low, they couldn't look down at their controls. Even a quick look could cause a crash. 2 hours and 27 minutes into the flight, the lead pilot briefly fired his afterburners twice. The quick burst of light wasn't for speed. It was a silent signal to the other jets in the group. Without using radios, the formation adjusted smoothly. Each pilot understood the meaning instantly. Following the signal, all 4 jets lowered their altitude from 200 feet to 150 feet. That was the lowest they could safely fly without being picked up by radar systems. Flying that close to the ground added even more risk, but it was the only way to stay hidden. Every move had to be precise, and every second counted. Military teams knew Venezuela's radar could turn on at any time, so for the next 260 miles, the jets had to stay very low. They flew under radar coverage. No radar system spotted them, and Cuba didn't report anything. The jets had entered a radar shadow, a zone where tracking systems can't see. Each of these fighter jets carried high-end strike weapons used by the Israeli Air Force. These were not standard models. They were F-15I Ram jets, with Ram meaning thunder. The original design came from the American F-15E Strike Eagle, but the United States made major changes. The upgrades gave the jets the ability to fly long missions without needing to refuel or return to base. Instead of using the aircraft as delivered, they rebuilt them with new systems and features. These jets were built differently. Their fuel tanks were not hanging under the wings like most aircraft. Instead, the tanks were built into the body of the plane. This is similar to a pickup truck. People can either throw gas cans in the truck bed where everyone can see them, or they can have extra fuel tanks built right into the frame under the hood. The built-in tanks do not stick out. They look like they belong there. That design lets them carry extra fuel without adding anything that could be spotted on radar. It gave them the range to fly hundreds of additional kilometers while staying low and avoiding risky mid-air refueling. Without those internal tanks, pilots had to make a trade-off. Either carry more fuel and fewer weapons, or load up on weapons and hope the fuel would be enough. The pilots wore helmets with the Elbit 4 system built in. It showed maps, radar warnings, and target info directly on the visor in front of their eyes. The display updated constantly, so everything they needed was always in view. It refreshed every 40 milliseconds, faster than a blink. That kept the information up to date, even as conditions changed quickly. At high speeds and low altitude, looking down at the instrument panel was not possible. This setup meant they did not have to look down at their instruments, which was critical during low-altitude, high-speed flight. Every second mattered, and keeping their eyes forward helped avoid deadly mistakes. The jets flew 239 miles from base. They had 290 miles behind them now. That is 470 kilometers total. They were past Cuban and Colombian radar coverage, but they had not hit Venezuelan or cartel surveillance zones yet. Right in the gap where nobody could see them. Below the jets were international waters east of Puerto Rico, a convenient spot chosen for refueling. At 24,000 feet, a KC-135 Stratotanker was already in position. It was originally built as a Boeing 707 derivative, and it had been converted to carry large fuel loads. Pilots nicknamed it the Milk Cow because it was a flying refueler built to supply jets mid-air. The meeting point was called Syrup 6. There were no means for radio calls or the ability to receive signals. Both aircraft arrived at the exact location and time. What happened next was interesting. The refueling worked like an exchange, similar to meeting someone in a parking lot without texting or calling, except it happened 4.5 miles above the ground. The F-15 fighter jets came in from below, one after the other, while the tanker kept its refueling tube stretched out. The setup worked like a fuel pump trying to connect with a car moving at about 70 miles per hour. Once the boom locked into place with the jet, fuel started flowing right away. Each jet stayed connected for about 3 minutes. In that short time, around 5 tons of fuel were pumped into the Ram fighter, which is enough to fill about 150 regular cars. After refueling, the jet gently pulled away, lifting slightly as if it were unhooking a trailer. As soon as it moved out of the way, the next jet came in and lined up for its turn. The tanker's fuel arm clicked into place again, and another 3 minutes went by as fuel transferred. This careful process was repeated until all 4 jets had received their fuel. The timing and precision had to be perfect because even a small mistake could cause serious trouble while flying at high speeds. No one spoke and no signals were exchanged, since any form of communication could have revealed their location. Enemy systems were actively scanning for radio waves, and even one transmission could have led to a missile launch. Each time a jet finished refueling and pulled away, the massive tanker, weighing around 100 tons, moved slightly before steadying itself for the next approach. Without this fuel stop, the Ram jets would have reached their target with no weapons. Empty weapon racks mean there were no missions. Now each jet carried 4 Rampage missiles under its wings, 2 on each side. That was sharp and deadly, ready to fire when ordered. The fuel gave them what they needed, range and firepower together. The tanker turned north and disappeared. The fighters kept going south. 2 hours and 53 minutes into the flight, warning lights flashed in the cockpits. Still 230 miles from Venezuela's coast, about 200 kilometers to go. The pilots expected this moment, but that didn't make it any less frightening. A quick electronic ping hit them, like someone tapping the pilots on the shoulder in a dark room. Then it came back stronger. The computer immediately knew what it was. Russian-made spoon rest radar. Venezuelan military forces had positioned it along the coastline, using it like a giant electronic eye scanning the sky for aircraft flying at medium altitude. The jets dropped lower fast, hugging the water to hide, just like ducking behind a wall when an enemy shines a light in a soldier's way. 10 seconds later, another signal appeared. This one swept in circles, maybe a P-19 radar, maybe a YC-6M. The exact type didn't matter. What mattered was that the cartel's air defense network was waking up. The moment electronic warfare began, the lead pilot activated a system called the Electronic Warfare Pod Model 8222. It was mounted under the center of the jet and immediately started sending out electronic signals designed to confuse enemy radar. These signals created noise and false readings, flooding Venezuelan radar screens with static and fake blips. Real targets disappeared from view. Just 3 seconds later, the second jet switched on its jammer, followed by the third and fourth. The effect was instant. Enemy screens lit up with ghost signals, fake aircraft that appeared to change speed and altitude without warning. The jamming systems targeted a specific radar frequency band known as X-band, which was used by both spoon rest and YC-6M radar systems. These are common tracking tools used to detect incoming aircraft. However, with the jammers active, the radar couldn't distinguish between what was real and what wasn't. Even if missiles were launched, they would be aimed at false targets. It was like trying to catch a shadow, nothing solid, nothing accurate. This kind of electronic interference allowed the jets to move through hostile airspace without being seen or tracked. 3 hours and 6 minutes into the mission, dark hills appeared ahead. Behind those hills sat the remote drug facility deep in Venezuela's jungle interior. The fighters climbed over the final ridge and suddenly flew across open terrain. The mountains that had hidden them were gone. They were completely in the open now. This changed the plan. When hiding stops being an option, speed becomes everything. The pilots pushed their throttles to maximum power. The Strike Eagle engines shot to life. Speed shot up from normal cruising to 550 miles per hour. That's almost 900 kilometers per hour. Red alerts flooded their helmet displays. Kill zones showed where enemy missiles could strike. Air defense positions appeared as bright dots. Control points tracked their movement. It was as if they were racing through hostile territory where every position had weapons aimed at the sky. 12 miles ahead, the massive Cartel drug facility came into view. A huge complex spread across the jungle clearing. Inside that compound sat their targets: the processing labs, the storage warehouses, the security towers. The pilots were almost there, flying at top speed across open ground, racing to strike before the cartel forces could strike back. Satellite photos from 12 hours ago showed the targets: 6 buildings full of cocaine processing equipment, 4 guard towers with mounted weapons, maybe a communications center too. In the back seats, weapons officers stayed still. They leaned over their controls. Target coordinates were already loaded in. Now they had to pick how to hit them. Steep dive. Make sure each warhead hits hard. 330 pounds of explosives per missile, 150 kilograms each. They would slam into the facility rooftops at 1,100 miles per hour, 1,800 kilometers per hour. At 3 hours and 7 minutes into the mission, the lead pilot gave the command. Weapons free. Switches flipped across the cockpit. All weapons are unlocked at once. Seconds later, the radio gave the next order. Fire! 1 missile dropped, then another, followed by 2 more. In the dark sky, flashes appeared as missiles from the other jets launched together. 6 seconds later, 16 Rampage missiles were in the air, flying at 1.5 times the speed of sound. 28 seconds after launch, the first missile hit its target. At 3 hours and 8 minutes, the main processing lab was destroyed. 3 seconds later, a blast tore through the cocaine warehouse. Another explosion hit the second storage building. The communications center was struck cleanly. More blasts followed. Trucks burned, roofs collapsed, and the radio antenna fell. The jets banked hard and turned away from the burning facility. The strike was over. Targets hit, buildings destroyed. But the mission was not finished yet. Getting to the target was only half the job. Getting home alive was the other half. 3 hours and 10 minutes total flight time. The pilots pulled back on their controls and started climbing away from the danger zone. Behind them, explosions still lit up the night sky. Processing labs burned, storage warehouses collapsed, command centers lay in ruins. But none of that mattered if they did not make it back to base. Every successful mission depended on one simple rule: bring everyone home. No military objective was worth trading an F-15 Strike Eagle fighter jet. More importantly, no target was worth losing the life of a trained pilot. The hardest part of their night was just beginning. They had attacked deep inside cartel territory. Now they had to fly hundreds of miles back through hostile airspace. Venezuelan radars would be fully active. Surface-to-air missiles would be ready. Fighter jets might scramble to intercept them. The escape would test everything they had learned about survival. Sirens went off inside the cockpits. The onboard systems had detected 2 incoming surface-to-air missiles. NATO referred to them as SA-6 Gainful, while the original Russian name was 2K-12 Cub. Although the system was developed in the 1960s, it remained dangerous. Each missile could reach speeds close to 3 times the speed of sound. Warning alarms screamed through the headsets. Enemy missiles had locked onto their position. The distance, 20 miles. Time until contact, 39 seconds. The pilots couldn't drop lower with nothing but water beneath them. Their only escape route pointed straight up. The weapons tracking them had enough firepower to shred an aircraft. Even though the missile technology dates from decades ago, it has injured plenty of pilots over the years. Speed meant everything now. The jets had to climb faster than the missiles could adjust their trajectory. The plan was direct: climb fast and break radar lock. If the radar lost track, the missiles would miss. If not, the outcome could be fatal. All four throttle levers pushed forward with a solid click. Engines roared, afterburners fired, sending flames out the back. The F-15 jets shot upward at a steep 60-degree angle, gaining altitude quickly. As they climbed, metal chaff scattered behind them to confuse tracking systems. Electronic jammers ran at full power. The force of the climb pressed the pilots deep into their seats. Heart rates spiked. Every system was pushed to its limit. The Caribbean coastline was getting closer, but the missiles were closing in even faster. The distance had dropped to 1 kilometer, with only 3 seconds left before impact. These missiles didn't need a direct hit. Each one had a proximity fuse designed to trigger between 50 and 100 meters from the aircraft. Inside each warhead were about 90 kilograms of explosives. When they went off, thousands of sharp metal fragments would shoot out in all directions, enough to destroy a jet and its pilot instantly. With 2 seconds remaining, the chase had lasted 38 seconds. Then the radar tracking the jets suddenly failed. The missiles lost their lock and couldn't find the targets anymore. Instead of hitting, they veered off course and exploded several kilometers away without causing damage. The Strike Eagle jets continued flying north, leaving behind only distant flashes in the sky and the result of a successful escape. The F-15 fighter jets continued their flight, reaching a total mission time of 3 hours and 15 minutes. Venezuela was now behind them. The aircraft were back over the Caribbean Sea, cruising at an altitude of 12,000 feet or 3,600 meters. Ahead lay friendly airspace. The operation was finished. There were no casualties and no damage to the jets. The only sign of what they had faced was the soaked flight suits worn by pilots who had come close to death. That was the kind of loss they could live with. After 3 hours and 15 minutes in the air, the 4 jets made it back to United States territory without damage. The mission proved how exact modern air operations need to be and how close things can get to going wrong. The pilots touched down at their base, fully aware of how narrow the margin had been. Their flight suits were soaked from the pressure of nearly being hit, but that was the only sign of what they had faced. There was no equipment lost and no injuries. The operation pushed every system to its limit and showed that even with top-tier technology, timing and chance still play a role. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.